Today we're going to talk about a company that holds the reins for the best-selling motor vehicle of all time. Sadly, it's not a four-wheel one, but it is the best-selling of all time, and a company that reinvigorated and re-innovated itself at every sign of trouble. Where every other company folded, this company found opportunity, and it has joined and left F1 in a variety of situations, from financial downfalls to global viral outbreaks to ultimate tragedy on track to just the peak of its performance, but having to refocus. This is a company that is known throughout the world for its reliability, innovation, and for the NSX as well. This is, of course, Honda. This is Storytime. I'm Jason Hassett, and welcome to Current and Combustion. Hey, so you might be wondering why for the entirety of this video there's a big yellow background that says Current and Combustion. Well, let me explain real quick and then we'll get back to the video, and you can skip this if you want because it's not really that important. It's just for some context for those of you who are wondering. Basically, I took a 4-year break from this channel, set up another channel where I did F1 news and F1 content, which got 17-something thousand subscribers, then started documentaries, and then started realizing that I missed doing automotive content. I tried publishing it on the rebranded version of the F1 channel. Turns out F1 people don't give a flying, well, you know, about automotive content in general, and I figured why not revive this channel. So the first 5 or 6 or 7 or 9 videos on this channel are going to be basically ones that were originally on that channel that then I cross-posted to here. So that kind of explains it. I guess that's all there is to say. Now let's jump back to the video. Hello everybody and welcome back to Storytime, the weekly series where we delve even, which is what I think I was trying to say, into one of the biggest car brands or car marques or models. Basically, we're focusing on the cars or the companies behind them in this series, as opposed to Car Heroes, which is launching shortly, which will be very much focused on the people behind the cars or behind the wheel of the car. And today we are focused on one of the companies I'm sure you're aware of, one of those mainstay companies and one of the big giants of not only the car industry, but also motorsport in general, and a beloved car brand, I think, of very many young people who perhaps the Civic was maybe one of the most lusted after cars among teenagers who couldn't get insurance for them in Ireland. This is, of course, Honda. And we're going to range today from going from their beginnings, the very founder and the 1940s, all the way up to 2010, and then a quick kind of rant on their future perhaps. And this is one for me that is interesting because, like the last few in this, and I think like most of these companies, to be honest, bar maybe one or two, I know a good bit about the company, but it's very high level. I don't know the details, and I know there's some intrigue here, but one reason I am excited about this is obviously Honda was a big force in Formula One behind many, many brilliant drivers. And obviously they're back in now, and next year they're joining alongside Newey and Alonso, fingers crossed, to push back again and hopefully get to the front once again. So with all that ado, let's jump into the history of the Honda. Konnichiwa. That was a terrible accent. So obviously Honda was founded by Soichiro Honda, who was born in 1906 to a blacksmith family, I believe. And he set out to kind of rebuild and innovate, and already had tried making piston rings for Toyota in the late 1930s. But war bombings destroyed his factory where he was making these piston rings. But that was really his start and what founded him as an entrepreneur in his engineering field. Undeterred, Soichiro Honda sold the remnants to Toyota, and in 1946, with the proceeds and a simple dream, like many entrepreneurs, turns out I can't pronounce things today, which is very annoying when we're going into talking about people and cars that come from a land that doesn't speak English. So this should be interesting from that point of view. And comment below when you catch me in something that I don't catch, because I'm sure it'll happen. But with these proceeds and a dream, he opened the Honda Technical Research Institute, or the HTRI, which sounds like some sort of infection you get from Boinky Boink. But moving on, in a tiny 16 by 16 foot shack, which is probably about 2 or 3 times the size of this studio, which is killing me with the lights here. There, a dozen workers began attaching repurposed 2-stroke radio generator engines to bicycles, creating improvised motorbikes to get Japan moving again. Obviously, a lot of the Honda history is focused around Japan's. There you go, Japan's. That was in English. This is atrocious. Other podcasts, better shows would restart at this point. They'd say this isn't good enough. But right here, we settle a lot, just like Honda did in Formula One for a while. Anyway, but yeah, a lot of the history of Honda, as well as the other Japanese car manufacturers that we'll go through, is obviously based around rebuilding in Japan and rebuilding after World War II. And to be honest, just a side note on this, Japan in general, it is just incredible how quickly they were able to rebuild after World War II. And one book I would say for anyone interested in things outside of cars, one book that people should check out is Phil Knight's Shoe Dog. He's the founder of Nike, because it gives some really good insights into how he was able to kind of build that brand around Japan and their rebuilding. But yeah, really, really interesting stuff. By 1948, Soichiro officially established Honda Motor Company Limited with co-founder Takeo Fujisawa. How can I pronounce that and not Japan? It's ridiculous. Handling Fujisawa, and I immediately get it wrong. Fujisawa handled the business side of the company. Their first product was the Honda A-Type motorized bicycle named the Bada Bada, after the sound that it made. Can imagine you know what I mean by that, right? Bada, 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 bada. Yeah, but anyway. In 1949, Honda introduced its first complete motorcycle, the Dream D-Type, making the start of Honda's engineered from scratch products. And Soichiro's hands-on engineering passion drove Honda's early innovations. And he was a tinkerer who even raced cars himself in the 1930s until he had a really bad crash in 1936. I'm remembering looking this up before. Sadly, the details aren't on here, but I'm sure as usual, someone will point out in the comments some details there if it's an interesting one. These post-war years set the stage for the company, and this was kind of fueled by one man's power of dreams that kind of became a mantra of the company. Honda then went into the 1950s, still very much as a motorcycle company. The decade saw hit bikes like the lightweight Club F-Type in 1952 and the debut Super Cub in 1958, which was a step through 50cc motorcycle designed for anyone to handle, and while being also tough enough for daily use. As you're probably aware, even if you're coming at this from, well, like I am, like from seeing Honda from the racing or as in car racing, Formula One, and the automotive side of just having a background of their cars, Honda was very much and still very much is a motorcycle first company in many ways. And their motorcycles are incredible. The CBRs, the Fireblades, beautiful bikes, for example. The 1958 Honda Super Cub C100 became an icon of accessible mobility with its friendly design and reliable 50cc 4-stroke engine, and it would go on to be produced in astonishing numbers and be loved worldwide, ultimately becoming the most produced motor vehicle in history. And I'm sure, to be honest with you, if you haven't been on one of its brothers or cousins, No, there's a joke in there somewhere. But yeah, if you haven't been on one of these motorcycles or at least seen one, then I'd be very surprised because they're just ubiquitous throughout the world. And I know in Europe, a lot of people started motorcycling on, an original like Honda 50, Honda 100. In fact, if you want some entertainment, there's a song called My Little Honda 50, which is really good. In 1959, fueled by Soichiro's insistence on quality and Fujisawa's savvy, Honda had grown into Japan's top motorcycle maker and was pushing itself overseas. That year, they opened their first US storefront in Los Angeles, selling small motorbikes to fat Americans. They weren't that fat back then. This was Mad Men time. In America, Honda's affordable, friendly bikes changed the cultural image of motorcycling, and their marketing proclaimed proudly, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda." Yeah. So this was countering that like kind of bad boy motorcycle image that had been around for a while. Like even before the 1950s, obviously there's motorcycle clubs, there's Harley Davidsons, but you know, just kind of ragtag rough people would ride motorcycles, and Honda tried to bring a kind of friendly image to that. I guess in the similar way to like how the Vespa became like the Italian way to just get around for so long. In the 50s, and you know, you had the mods in France, for example. So I guess, yeah, Honda brought that to Los Angeles. But sales boomed as students and suburbanites embraced two wheels. Meanwhile, Honda set its sights on racing glory. And in 1959, a team of Honda riders arrived at the grueling Isle of Man TT, unheard of for a Japanese company at the time. And within 2 years, Honda motorcycles were winning world championships in the 125 and 250cc classes in just 2 years. 1961, they won those, announcing Honda as a global motorsport contender. And by the end of the 1950s, Soichiro had transformed his startup into a billion-dollar enterprise, and Honda bikes were even outselling venerable brands like Triumph and Harley Davidson on their home turf, which was incredible. And the Isle of Man TT, by the way, also absolutely incredible. An amazing thing to watch. Now, where things changed for Honda was in a bit of legislation in the 1960s, which helped out a lot of companies to kind of push on with creating cars. Now, technically, these laws were introduced in 1949, I believe, but I know they were expanded in the 50s to a point where a lot of motorcycle companies and smaller engine companies were able to get into cars. And this was K cars, or Keiji Dosha. They were a class of ultra-compact vehicles unique to Japan, limited by law to 600cc engines and strict size dimensions. They were introduced by the Japanese government in 1949 to promote affordable car ownership and domestic automotive manufacturing in the aftermath of World War II. Designed to navigate narrow streets and offer low running costs, K cars benefited from tax breaks, insurance discounts, and relaxed parking rules, and became essential very, very quickly to life in Japan, especially for first-time drivers, rural drivers, young drivers, etc. But this gave a very, very low, not low effort, but low barrier entry point. Right there. I need to give. Can you name this? I don't know what to call. Dino just seems too much. But yeah, this gave an entry for, for these guys to get in. And there was a lot of companies kind of filled that void, but motorcycle companies, and especially Honda, saw it as an easy way to kind of get into the automotive world. And as Japan's economy began to surge in the 1960s, Honda boldly decided to take this leap, jumping from 2 wheels to 4. In 1963, they launched their very first automobile, the tiny T360 pickup truck, which was a pickup truck, a K-car pickup truck, which was tiny, and the S500 Sports Roadster. The S500 came with a high-revving engine and even used chain-driven rear wheels, a quirky nod to Honda's motorcycle heritage. As you probably know if you've ridden a motorcycle, especially, it's chain-driven just like a bike. These early cars were small but signaled big aspirations. Honda followed up with the S600 and S800 sports cars later in the decade, and in 1967 introduced the N360 minicar, a boxy but charming 2-cylinder runabout named the Unokuro, which is the little puppy, for its cute looks. The N360 was incredibly cheap and incredibly popular, kind of doing what they did with the motorbikes in Los Angeles, in Japan, with the car, and trying to make something that was just so overtly friendly that it kind of became that kind of nice car, and it fits in with kind of Japanese styling anyway. But it was surprisingly roomy inside, and ignited my car boom in Japan by putting kind of 4 wheels within reach of young families. And in 1969, Honda even began selling a version of the minicar to the US, the N600, which was the very first exported to America car that Honda made. And it kind of flopped, to be honest. I mean, this is a time when you got to think like 1969, This is 4 years after the Mustang debuted. And America's economy was absolutely booming. There was still kind of a leftover of post-war optimism, the hippie movement. But yeah, Americans just weren't interested. But lucky for Honda, foreshadowing, there would be a downturn in the economy coming soon, which would help them out. What is incredible, though, about the 1960s for Honda, and as many of you listening to this probably watched the other videos on this channel and know that this channel was originally Wheel Sports, the Formula One channel, was originally Grand Prix, actually, but that's a different story. The amazing thing about what Honda did was that, in 1964, just 4 years after putting together their very first automobile, hadn't even launched their automobile by that stage, like, they had just gotten into cars, and they immediately in 1964 got into Formula One with their completely own team. Like, not with engines like they would later, but like with the actual Honda team. Like, they just started building cars. Absolutely incredible. And as you can imagine, the other teams chuckled at the idea, until Honda's white and red RA272 race car clinched a victory at the 1965 Mexican Grand Prix, making it the first F1 win for a Japanese car. The RA272's screaming V12 engine and Richie Ginter's driving silenced everybody. Honda even won another Grand Prix in 67 in Italy with John Surtees. But this was temporary and tempered by tragedy and business reality. When in 1968, Honda's new RA302 car crashed at the French Grand Prix, killing Joe Schlescher. And the company was also facing challenges, selling its road cars abroad. So that was kind of the blow to them that would get them out of Formula One for the first time. Not the last time, but for the first time. And they basically pulled out of Formula One in 1968 to refocus on their consumer business. But yeah, it's just insane that, like, when you think about it, like, this little company, which started only a decade and a half earlier with, tiny, just putting like repurposed engines on bicycles, then went on within a decade to win the Isle of Man TT, to start selling massively in America. And then within 2 decades, it's winning Formula One races. Like, it genuinely is absolutely incredible. But it's the 1970s where things would really boom for Honda. The 1970s were a turning point as Honda evolved from a niche player to a global force in automotives. The catalyst was one car, the Honda Civic, car that they still sell today. They launched this in 1972. The subcompact hatchback arrived just in time because, as I foreshadowed earlier, in 1973, something would happen in America which would cause severe problems. The oil crisis. So American drivers suddenly needed fuel-efficient, reliable cars, and the Civic delivered. They had delivered the car itself just in time to deliver on this needs. Honda equipped it with the innovative CVCC engine, which stood for Compound Vortex Controlled Combustion. How can I get that right and not pronounce Japan right? Ridiculous. Which cleverly met new US emission standards without a catalytic converter. That meant great gas mileage and a clean exhaust, a huge selling point in an era of smog and fuel rationing. And the Civic was a smash hit globally, known for its simplicity, bulletproof engineering, and it even won praise from Car and Driver and other magazines for beating much larger cars in both efficiency but also practicality, importantly as well. The first generation Honda Civic 1972 model may have been small, but it had a huge impact. And while the Civic became kind of the backbone of Honda and the reason it was so trusted within a few years, they also built on that success massively. They didn't just stop there, as Honda just didn't throughout its history. Honda introduced the larger Accord in 1976, a fun-to-drive, kind of bigger family version of the car. It was a fuel-efficient compact that would eventually become a legend in its own right in many ways. But the Accord found an eager audience, especially in the US, where it offered a smart alternative to gas-guzzling sedans. And by the late 1970s, Honda was selling so many cars in America that they made a groundbreaking decision to build them in America. So yeah, Tesla didn't do it first. Detroit did it first, I guess. Ford did. The Cadillac brothers. The Detroit Dodge brothers. They weren't anywhere near first, but they were there. And that's the main thing. In 1979, Honda opened a motorcycle plant in Ohio, famously opened by Dave Chappelle. You can fact check me on that if you want. And on November 1st, 1982, the first US-built Honda car, a silver Accord sedan, rolled off the Marysville, Ohio assembly line. This made Honda the first Japanese automaker to manufacture cars in the United States, a monumental step towards globalization. Meanwhile, Honda motorcycles continue to innovate. The 1975 Goldwing, for instance, introduced a liquid-cooled flat-4 engine that made long-distance riding silky smooth and put Honda up there with the likes of Harley and so on. The Goldwing is just a beautiful, kind of touring car on two wheels. I remember one of the guys I used to work with had one of these, and I was always just in awe of it. And on the corporate side, 1973 marked an end of an era. Both Soichiro Honda and Fujisawa retired from the company that year on its 25th anniversary. And by this stage, Honda had just become a global giant, just absolutely massive, and had seemed to, it had seemed to pull on every opportunity that came its way without fail. That's what thankfully put the company onto steady ground, where even though it would have a tumultuous future, things would, go against it, but it would always it would go back, figure things out, and then come back out punching. And even you could just never count this company out. So yeah, they passed the torch to a new generation of leaders with Kiyoshi Kawashima became Honda's new president, with the understanding that Honda would need fresh ideas for a rapidly changing world. Especially at a time, like when you think about it, this is when, again, going back to Japan expanding massively, like we think about China now as like the world's factory. And even then that's like starting to kind of move on. But very much like until the 2000s, Japan was like the advanced technology factory of the world. Like when you think about it, for people my age, like 36, when we thought of Japan, we thought of the PlayStation, Toyota, and Hiroshima. But we usually thought of the positive things first. The 1980s saw Honda flex its engineering muscle and diversify. In 1986, Honda did something unprecedented when it launched Acura, or Acura, as it should be pronounced, Americans. The first Japanese luxury car brand. Models like the Acura Legend and the Integra offered premium performance and build quality, showing that Honda could do upscale, and forcing rivals Toyota and Nissan to scramble later on with Lexus and Infiniti. This was a weird thing back in the day because like Ford did go down this route, didn't they? But like with Lincoln, but that was an acquisition more than anything else. And I guess with Mercury, this was just a thing done back then, I guess, where you didn't want to sell like $100,000 car with a Ford brand on it or a Honda brand on it, which I guess makes sense when you think that, like, I remember up until a certain point, you couldn't sell a BMW past a certain point because it was like, well, if you're going to buy a $100,000 BMW, why would you not buy a Bentley? Whereas now it feels like those walls are broken and maybe this stuff isn't needed as much anymore. But yeah, anyway. Around the same time, Honda engineers introduced a marvel under the hood, the VTEC, which is just a mainstay of, it's a god of the engine world in many ways. This was the variable valve timing and lift electronic control, a system that gave engines both low-end torque and high-end power by changing cam profiles on the fly. This first appeared in 1989 on the tiny Japanese market Integra XSI. 1989, not only was the VTEC first appeared, also another iconic legend appeared that year, as I was born in June. And anyway, VTEC soon became synonymous with high-revving Honda engines and distinctive kick at high RPMs, the crown jewel of Honda's innovation. came along with this engine in 1990, though, with the NSX, which stood for the New Sports Car Experimental, for anyone wondering. And though it was developed through the late 80s, like through the 80s, it debuted right at the turn of the decade. And the original Honda NSX in 1990 really just showcased what Honda could do, and that it wasn't just this little company. Obviously, this was also at the peak of its F1 career, which I'll get to in a moment. But yeah, this was a mid-engine supercar with an all-aluminium body and a high-revving V6. It offered Ferrari-like performance with Honda reliability, and even Formula One legend Ayrton Senna contributed input to its handling development. And the NSX proved not only could Honda build something reliable, it could also build world-class sports cars with European styling, and essentially could provide Ferrari handling and power with the reliability of a Japanese car. And of course, we'll get into the motorsport, but this was also a time when, you know, the late 80s was, you know, they were really, really huge now on the world stage. So by the late 1980s, Honda's global footprint was enormous. They opened new factories across North America, Asia, and Europe, from Canada to the UK, to keep up with demand. And in 1989, a major milestone underscored how far Honda had came when the Honda Accord became the best-selling car in America, the first time a foreign automaker topped that chart. So yeah, at least I know now. That's another little tidbit from history. The year I was born, the Accord was the best-selling car in America. Well, that's good to know. They sold over 360,000 Accords that year, and it beat out Ford's Escort and Taurus, signaling Japan's rise in the auto industry and success of transplant factories, as they're called. Notably, more than half of these Accords were built in Ohio under the... I was about to make the joke that basically Dave Chappelle was in charge of the factory, but it is Ohio that he's from, right? I'm pretty sure. Fact check me on that. I love Dave Chappelle. Pretty sure it's Ohio. Culturally, Honda had become a household name, known for quality and innovation, and Soichiro Honda himself, still a beloved figurehead, was honored in 1980 by People magazine as one of the most 25 intriguing people in the world, dubbed the Japanese Henry Ford. Of course, the 1980s were, I think arguably still are, unless you're a Max Verstappen fan, the glory days of Honda in Formula One. Like absolute glory days. So Honda obviously decided to get back into Formula One. They sat it out through the 70s. And they returned in 1983 as an engine supplier. And by the mid-1980s, their turbocharged engines were nearly unbeatable. Honda powered Williams and Lotus to victory in 1985, and then absolutely dominated from 86 to 1991, winning 6 F1 Constructors Championships and 5 Straight Drivers Championships in a row. They won 2 manufacturers' titles with Williams in 86 and 87. They won then 4 more with McLaren from 88 to 91. Is that right? 89, 90, 88, 89, 90, 91. Yes. So they won, and then they won 5 Constructors Championships. Was it Nelson Piquet in 87? I want to say. Then it was Senna 88, Senna 90, Senna 91, and Prost 89. I think. Let's check the notes. Nelson Piquet, Ayrton Senna. Yes, got it right. Boom. And then they dropped out of the sport. Ridiculously, on a peak. Ayrton Senna, Alain Prost, Nelson Piquet all won titles with Honda screaming engines behind them. The McLaren-Honda partnership from 1988 to 1992 became stuff of legend, and the MP44 is still one of the most beautiful and spectacular cars of all time in Formula One. Senna, Prost, McLaren, Hondas won 15 out of 16 races in 1988. And this was a record-setting campaign powered by the Honda's mighty V6 turbos. And at the same time, Honda bikes were gearing up on racetracks too, with riders like Freddie Spencer winning Motorcycle Grand Prix World Championships on Hondas. By 1992, however, Honda decided to pull out of F1 because even though this was at the peak of their success and they wanted to keep going, Honda's empire, its automotive empire, was under threat, was having serious issues on the kind of the actual car economics side, and decided it needed to kind of withdraw all other resources and go hard into that. and thankfully managed to save the company. But yeah, the early 1990s brought significant changes for Honda. In 1991, at the age of 84, Honda himself, Mr. Honda, passed away. And fittingly, that week, Ayrton Senna won the Hungarian Grand Prix in a McLaren Honda, and emotionally dedicated the victory to Mr. Honda's memory, closing a chapter in the company's history. And Kawamoto took over the company as well. And for Kawamoto, unlike the success on track, he faced an incredibly sobering situation with Honda. They were blindsided by the sudden popularity of SUVs and trucks in the 1990s, where they had almost no offering. Profits faltered, and in Japan there were even whimpers that rivals Mitsubishi Motors might attempt a hostile takeover of Honda. This was an unthinkable scenario that nevertheless underscored how vulnerable Honda had become, and Kawamoto responded with urgency. He slashed less popular models and fast-tracked development of the company's first SUV, the compact CR-V, which launched in 1995. And a car-like minivan with the first Odyssey in 1994, trying to pull them back up and get on top of this SUV craze. These family-friendly vehicles were hits, particularly in North America, and helped Honda ride the SUV wave it had nearly missed, which is incredible. Again, this is a company that almost died because it missed out on a craze, and yet managed within 2 years to turn around and make something so popular. I don't think any other company could have done this. Like, Ford has been in these situations, it's taken a lot longer, for example. I'm trying to think of another company, maybe a Toyota, that could genuinely turn around that quick and get on top of something it almost missed. And in a symbolic move, Kawamoto pulled out of Formula One in 1992, stating that motorsport spending would be reined in to focus on core products and new eco-friendly images. It was the end of an era for racing fans, but it freed up resources for road car innovation. Despite the struggles, the 1990s saw Honda produce some beloved cars. The Integra Type R, for example, which I'm sure many of you motorsport fans are aware of, became the kind of front-wheel drive performance legend of the 90s. The S2000 Roadster, which is an absolute beauty, launched in 1999 as a 50th anniversary present to itself, basically. Remember, the S500 was what they launched with, basically, their Roadster, that and the K-car pickup trucks. The S2000 was a 50-year anniversary present. And the Civic and Accord continue to evolve as segment benchmarks. And in 1997, the little Honda CR-V effectively kicked off the crossover SUV craze, offering car-like comfort with a dash of off-road capability. Perfect for the new suburban lifestyle where you need to go to the shops, climbing over all the harsh terrains of perfectly paved roads. On the luxury side, Acura had a mid-decade identity crisis, but ended the 1990s strong with the 1999 Acura TL and the redesigned 2001 MDX SUV, showing Honda's upscale brand could also adapt just like its daddy. Perhaps the most impactful development, though, however, was Honda's early bet on hybrid technology. In December 1999, Honda introduced the Insight in North America, a tiny two-seat hybrid coupe that became the first hybrid vehicle in the US market, not to be confused with the Toyota Prius, just edging out the Prius, by the way. But yeah, they were actually the first ones there. It was that kind of weird teardrop-looking hybrid, which was very, very strange, but it was super hot. But it was super high fuel efficient with 70 mpg, and it made headlines. Even if its quirky looks kind of limited its mainstream appeal, if you're looking for something economic, if finances are more concerning to you than the car's actual looks, it's hard to say no to 70 mpg when you know it's a Honda. You know reliably it's going to be brilliant. But yeah, it was a bold statement that saw Honda push its efficiency into the near future, to be honest. And by the decade's end, Honda was recovering, in stride. It was no longer a scrappy upstart of the 60s, nor the kind of company that was falling apart of the early 90s. And it also wasn't like the overconfident juggernaut that it was in the 80s. It was kind of in a perfect harmony of what Honda needed to be. And this kind of set the stage for the 2000s in the future, a Honda that very much could deal with anything. The 2000s kicked off with Honda doubling down on its commitment to greener tech, first with the Insight, and then Honda quickly rolled out a Civic hybrid in 2002, making hybrid technology available in a familiar 5-passenger sedan. They also explored hydrogen fuel cell vehicles with the Honda FCX, which was massively covered on Top Gear, but hydrogen just never really kicked off. I think it's just much harder to transport than gasoline, and then you'd need to remove the entire gasoline. It's just easier to make sustainable fuels at that point, I think, anyway. But yeah, this was one of the first fuel cell cars to be leased to government fleets in the US and Japan. In 2008, Honda introduced the FCX Clarity, a sleek hydrogen-powered sedan in limited production, and it was heralded as a technological breakthrough in zero-emission driving. In fact, the Clarity was built in the world's first dedicated fuel cell vehicle manufacturing facility, showcasing Honda's pioneering work on hydrogen power in an era where most automakers were barely dipping their toes into fuel cell. And the debut of the Earth Dreams technology, which may be familiar to some Formula One fans, aimed on reducing emissions. They even tried a sporty hybrid with the CRZ in 2010 and tried to recapture some of that hot hatch hybrid feelings. Not every one of these, though, worked out brilliantly. They came out with the new Insight, the second generation Insight in 2009. And it completely flopped against the Prius, which had kind of become a mainstay of Hollywood douchebags by that point. But it never outsold Toyota's icon, the Prius. Nonetheless, Honda earned respect for continuously refining hybrids and not being afraid to try new approaches. Throughout the 2000s, Honda grew its global manufacturing network. New car assembly plants grew up in China, Thailand, and Indonesia to serve Asia's emerging market. And in India, Honda's joint venture, Hero Honda, had already made the company the top motorcycle company in India, with the Hero Honda Splendor being essentially the Civic of motorbikes for the Indian market. Honda's auto division in India launched popular models like the City Sedan and later the Fit or Jazz. And Europe saw Honda deepen ties with UK's Rover, where they were building cars together since the 80s, early 90s, and build cars like the Civic in Swindon, England. But the decade also threw them some curveballs. Obviously, the 2008 financial crisis kicked into place. And all of this obviously kicked them in the teeth when it came to Formula One, because up until the 2008 financial crisis, they had been building up what could have been, foreshadowing, a mighty F1 team under the leadership of Ross Brawn and co. Jenson Button driving there. They had won a couple of Grand Prix, Jenson Button in Hungary in 2006, I want to say, or 2007. Maybe I'm getting the year wrong. It's a long time now. It's nearly 2 decades. And Button, when they pulled out of the sport, thought, well, the chance of riding this team to a world championship is gone, only for Braun to buy the team from Honda for £1. Honda conceded to put $100 million into the company to help it go for one more year in order to not fire all the staff, which, again, you got to give Honda credit. Like, most companies would just pull out and sell off the assets, but they actually thought about the staff. And as many of you know, Braun then went on to move over to a Mercedes power unit and win the championships the very next season, which is an absolutely incredible story. And that team, you're probably aware, is now the Mercedes F1 team. Just an incredible story. The Honda F1 team was suddenly put up for sale. It would famously be brought for £1 and transformed into Braun GP, which ironically won the F1 championship in 2009 without Honda, a bittersweet outcome for the folks back in Tokyo. Honda shelved some exciting products, including a V10 supercar successor to the NSX, as part of tightening its belt for the 2008 crisis. And a bright spot was in 2005 when Honda founded the Honda Aircraft Company, aiming to bring Honda innovation to the skies. And as you may be aware, later on that became the 2015 Honda Jet, which was kind of a Honda for only slightly rich people. And while the Accord and the Civic continued their popularity, and Civic even won Motor Trend's Car of the Year in 2006, The pop culture side saw Honda jump into things that you may remember now that I bring them up, with Honda's Asimo robot, introduced in 2000. And this became a massive celebrity. I remember watching this and it's like, oh my God, we'll have robots in 5 years, and we're still not there, but it could climb stairs, walk, all these different things. But yeah, this was to kind of show Honda as an innovation company and not just a car company. But sadly, not all publicity was positive for them. There was a massive issue brewing for Honda with the Takata airbag recalls. Honda being one of Takata's biggest customers, Takata was an airbag producer, was massively impacted because throughout the late 2000s, millions of Honda and Acura vehicles were recalled to replace defective airbags inflators that could explode and injure occupants. Not exactly what you want from a safety feature. It was the largest automotive recall in US history, and Honda had to scramble to notify owners, manage repairs, and handle the PR fallout. The saga would stretch on for years, but it prompted Honda to double down on safety research and development and customer outreach, and kind of to bring that stuff in-house. Again, another situation of Honda capitalizing on opportunity where perhaps others would see problems. They just always did this. And then we get into kind of 2010 and beyond. They had the green shift, so Honda did its Earth Dream series, engine series in 2011 again, and expanded hybrids across basically all of its products. They revived the NSX in 2016 with the new NSX, which is absolutely beautiful. Obviously, it was under Acura, I think, in the rest of the world. They had the disasters like the earthquake and tsunami in 2011. And the airbag recall that we just talked about. But they brought in Honda Sensing to help with this as well. The CRV and HRV went on to be global sensations, and the Civic became a design winner across the board in 2016. They sold their 100 millionth Super Cub by 2017, which is insane. And it's still the best-selling motor vehicle in history, the Honda Super Cub. They partnered with GM to build a joint EV platform, and Sony, who they're going to build Afeela EVs with very shortly. And they're going to announce, and they have announced that they're going to be 100% EV and fuel cell by 2040. And they launched the first level 3 self-driving car, the Honda Legend, for Japan only in 2021. And just made global moves everywhere. But most importantly, for us F1 fans, in 2015, they came back into the sport with McLaren, which got off to a rocky start. But they redeemed themselves by joining up with Red Bull in 2019. It may have been 2018. I cannot remember the year. I think it was 2019. Which also didn't immediately work out well, but the two teams kind of, they figured out their issues. You had amazing people like Newey there and Dan Fallows in particular at that era who could work with them. And they worked together, Red Bull and Honda, to win world championships again. Drivers' Championship in 2021, and then 2 World Constructors' Championships in 22 and 23. And another Drivers' Championship in 24. And Honda, unfortunately, for them, I guess, decided with the COVID pandemic, just like in 2008, and I guess just like in 1992, they had to pull out and focus on their car division, only for everything to immediately turn around and make the investment worthwhile. So similar to kind of 2009 in that setting. But at least they did get to reap some of the glory with the Honda still on the car and Tsunoda now driving. But the future looks bright for them in Formula One as they next year begin to partner with Aston Martin, which will be led by Andy Cowell, a former engine master at Mercedes, and obviously Adrian Newey, who's gone there to lead up the technical division. So yeah, the future for Honda in motorsport looks bright. It's obviously, still huge in MotoGP, although I'm not following that, but I believe this year is a bit more difficult for them. But yeah, Honda, a company that has a bright history and probably a bright future if you base anything on its history. That has been Storytime. I've been Jason Hassett. This is a slightly shorter one than normal, but I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you again next week for another Storytime. Don't forget to subscribe. Talk to you soon.